Hi folks, back in the car again. I've just done a video up on the top of a little hill that's above there. It's a fantastic spot, great view and everything, but I got interrupted by a dog and that kind of knocked me off my throw a little bit. So I'm back in the car doing what my good friend Richard tells me is the worst Marion and Jeff impression he's ever seen. Now, if that means nothing to you, type Marion and Jeff into YouTube. It was news to me, but this is in fact actually now the worst Rob Brydon impression you'll ever see. Now, we need to talk about funds. Funds with a D. Collective investments. Let's say you want to buy some shares. You might ring up your stockbroker and ask him to buy some BP shares for you. And he will do that. And a couple of weeks later, you'll ring him again and say you'd like to buy some Vodafone or some British Gas or whatever. And before you know it, you've built up a portfolio of shares, a bunch of individual shareholdings. Now, that can be a bit of a hassle. It's alright with small numbers of shares, 5 or 6 shareholdings maybe, but once you get to 10, 15, 20, the paperwork involved with that can be a real pain in the neck. You're always getting huge documents in the post, prospectuses for share offers or things like scrip dividends, all kinds of weird things like that, and it takes some time to keep on top of that. And for many people it's a hobby. Owning individual shares is a hobby, and that's fine. But in my experience as a financial planner, people don't buy individual shares with money which is core to their financial plan. They tend to do it around the edges, simply because it can be a hassle. It can also be difficult to diversify wide enough. Remember, one of the core ways we reduce risk is to spread our money around. You and me, as individual investors, probably don't have enough money to spread our money wide enough to reduce risk effectively. It can also be a hassle buying and selling and making capital gains, which can be taxed. That can be a bit problematic as well. But essentially it's down to not being able to spread the money wide enough, either the number of shares we hold or perhaps the different geographical areas, sectors. We just can't spread the money wide enough. So in order to fix this problem, some bright spark came up with something called the collective investment, or the fund. A couple of different types of these, which I'll come to in due course. But for the purposes, all it simply is a bunch of like-minded people who want to invest in roughly the same things, pool their money together. And so now we're talking big numbers, hundreds of millions of pounds, even billions in some cases. And that money is invested in a fund, and there is usually a manager managing that fund. And that manager has a mandate, so we might say to him, we would like you to invest in UK FTSE 100 shares. And so he then, or she, decides which shares to buy, and we can buy more different shareholdings because we are pooled together with everybody else who is a part of that fund. So now, instead of me holding individual shareholdings and having all the paperwork and hassle that comes with that, I have shares in one fund. And that means that the fund manager has to deal with all the hassles because it's the fund now which own the shares. I own units in the fund. And that just makes my life a lot easier. It means I can spread the money wider, avoid a lot of the paperwork. Now all I get is a 6-monthly statement from my fund manager telling me what the funds are worth. Now that's important because the units in the fund are only worth, of course, what the underlying investments are worth. So if the shares held by the fund go down, the value of the units goes down. Pretty common sense. So the price of the units fluctuates depending on the entirely on the underlying values of the shares I hold, with one exception, things called investment trusts, but I won't muddy the waters now. I'll come back to those. So a collective investment means I can group my money together with a load of like-minded people, spread my money wider therefore, and reduce the paperwork and the hassles. Capital gains made within the fund, when the fund manager decides to buy and sell shares, capital gains made there don't affect me as an individual. I only get a capital gain or loss when I buy and sell the fund, not the individual things within it. So funds are a really useful tool as part of your financial planning to help spread your money wider. Now, we can actually go one step further than that because there is such a thing as a fund of funds. So just as an ordinary fund will buy lots of individual shares, what a fund of funds does is buy lots of funds. So it's another level of diversification. So if I have units in one fund, I might have indirectly spread my money over, say, 200 different shares. Well, if I own a fund of funds, chances are there's probably 10 or 15 funds within that, which each themselves have a couple of hundred shares. So I can now spread my money maybe 1,000 or 2,000 ways, individual stocks. So fund of funds are a collective investment of collective investments. Confused? Yeah, you will be. So it's important that we understand funds, because they're an essential part of building a decent investment portfolio, I think. Now, what we're going to talk about next is active investment versus passive investment. Very important, and I'll see you next time for that, for another episode of Marion and Jeff here in my car in West Cornwall. See you next time.